Hi, this is Ron Friedman, the author of the book, I Killed Optimus Prime, so sue me. But don't do it too fast because you're listening to U.S. Modernist Radio, and you'll be better for it.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. There's a building at JFK Airport in New York that people have been talking about for almost 60 years. At one time, it was the most modern airport terminal in the world, symbolizing the jet age for generations of travelers. This building had no peer. It was among the most unique in the world, and its creator was Eero Saarinen. Saarinen was one of the most visionary architects in the world. He's known for the Washington Dulles Airport and the St. Louis Arch, among many other amazing projects. For years, the airline TWA, remember them? They were later absorbed by American Airlines, used this terminal as its glamorous gateway to the world, sending off passengers in style. This was an era when people dressed up to fly, which I barely remember, and there was no such thing as airport security back then. The building itself remained magnificent, even as the volume of passengers increased so much that it had to be abandoned as an active flight terminal. After a few decades in mothballs and dangerously close to demolition a few times, Saarinen's TWA terminal has been meticulously restored and expanded with a world-class hotel adjacent to it. And even better, a massive underground conference facility you'd never know was there. Just ask U.S. Modernist Radio's George Smart. He was in New York for a huge gala opening dinner inside that underground conference center this past summer. He talked with Richard Southwick, project partner in charge with restoration architects Bayer Blinder Bell. But first, George sat down in Los Angeles at the iconic Beverly Hilton with Eero Saarinen's son, Erik Saarinen. Then George flew back to New York to visit with architects Anne-Marie Lebrano and Leah Chavera. Their firm is not surprisingly named Lebrano Chavera, and they were the team responsible for the brilliant new TWA hotel. You know, the one with the massive underground conference facility. All that in a minute. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by modernist realtor Angela Roll and our newest sponsor, Nichiha.
Durability, designed to last for years to come, bringing you peace and tranquility. You feel relaxed, knowing your house can easily achieve any exterior look and any color. Wood, concrete. Your house loves feeling this good, and you love feeling this good. Nichiha, Nichiha. Nichiha, Nichiha. Say it with me. Nichiha. Advanced engineering. Nichiha, Nichiha. Durability, textures, finishes, and colors. Visit Nichiha.com/US Modernist. Nichiha, Nichiha, Nichiha. That's N. C H I H. Wait for it. A look you'll love. Nichiha.
Let's go out to Los Angeles. Inside the lovely Beverly Hilton in Beverly Hills, I visited with Eero Saarinen's son, cinematographer and film director Erik Saarinen. His parents divorced when Erik was 12 years old. Saarinen has a long career and has photographed several features, including The Hills Have Eyes and Lost in America. He directed and co-produced a documentary about his father's work Eero Saarinen, the architect who saw the future. And he's working on a new documentary about his grandfather, architect Eero Saarinen.
We are hiding in a conference room in the famed Beverly Hilton Hotel in Los Angeles, talking with Eero Saarinen. And that's how you pronounce it, right? Saarinen?
Well, I pronounce it Saarinen because my mother pronounced it Saarinen.
Okay.
But the Finns pronounce it Saarinen, and my sister pronounces it Saarinen because she's more of a representative of the family for a longer period of time than I am.
Okay. And you've been a filmmaker, photographer, director. You've even produced films over your career?
Well, the whole short story part of it is that I had to do something following this double act of towering artists and architects of my grandfather and my father, and my mother also, and lawyers also. But anyway, following those families, I had to do something that had to do with art. But there are two answers to this. One was I was at the Louvre, and I was staring at the Mona Lisa, and I knew about how her eyes were supposed to follow me around. So I sat for a while, and then I moved over to another place, and I thought, well, it's just a flat picture, and it's not moving. So now how long am I supposed to do this? So I ended up looking at it from different angles for about 10 minutes, walked out and thought, there must be a better medium, or maybe there's a better medium today. Then the other part of the answer is that my father's best friend, Eero's best friend, was Charlie Eames.
Oh, sure.
And he's my godfather. My father was working on Dulles International Airport, and he had to sell the idea of the mobile lounges, which were pieces of the airport that disconnected and then took the people to the plane.
Giant buses, basically.
Giant buses, yeah.
But they still have, I think, have a few of them left.
Yeah, they take them to some square thing in the center that you wait in for a while, and then they take you to a plane. So now it's all messed up. But in terms of Eames, my father had to sell the idea of the mobile lounge, and it's a multi-million, maybe billion-dollar venture, and what's all the basis of the airport is the fact that you only walk 120 feet and you're on your plane. You get into this VIP lounge style thing that will go up and down, and you can smoke, you can drink, you can read the coffee, you can pick up chicks, you can do whatever you want. And these were those days, and then you're in your plane. So it was wonderful. And then if he wanted to expand the airport, because it's completely symmetrical, he designed for the future to expand sideways. So now it's something like 1,500 feet wide. But he didn't go that far. Now it's kind of a big mess because then somebody thought, well, it'd be cheaper to have a big box in the center of the runways, and so now people
they
have
built
to walk.
midfield concourses out from the airport.
Right.
They did expand the main building, which was so beautiful, by 100%.
Yeah.
In the 90s, I think it was.
Yeah, and that was Skidmore.
Skidmore, Owens, and Merrill did that?
Yeah. Anyway, to sell the idea of the mobile lounge, which everybody thought was a great idea at the time, my father went to Charlie Eames, and Charlie Eames made sort of super cool sales films. And he did a cartoon of people walking to the moon and back 2.5 times, and that's how many times passengers walk these days to get to their airplanes in 1 year. And he showed this. And then he showed people getting on it, and it was a 6-minute film, and it sold the whole thing. And as my father walked out, I was there, and under his breath, he said, maybe I should have been a filmmaker to himself.
Really? Okay.
So that opened up the possibility to me.
Did you dip your toe into architecture? I understand you worked a couple summers in your dad's office.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure that it wasn't fun for me, and I made sure.
You were damn sure it wasn't fun.
Well, it was okay for 8 hours, but these guys were suffering for 16 hours. Not suffering, they were suffering and creating, and they were very creative. All those people were handpicked, and I found out very, very much later that my father really did want me to be an architect, but that's probably because he was his father's architect and so on. But no, I just felt that I had to find something that was really fun, and that became film.
And a couple of years ago, I guess, late 2016, early 2017, you were involved with a film called The Architect Who Saw the Future, about your dad.
Right.
Which was beautiful, by the way.
Well, thanks. You know, the producer part of that, I get a producer credit just because they said, well, you need something. You know, I was saying, well, maybe I could have a creative director, or maybe I could have a title saying, no, but this is PBS, so they only have certain titles, and you can't be a co-creative director or a co-director or anything like that. Even though I asked. I said, what about the Coen brothers? And they said, well, that's different.
Yeah.
You know, it's not PBS. But anyway, Peter Rosen asked me to shoot it for him, to be the director of photography. And I said no because I had hated my father, based on the fact that when I was 12, he kicked us out of our own house, my sister, my mother, and I. And we moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts. And then subsequently we went to different prep schools. So my sister and I were split up and kept away from our mother. And
your father, too, I guess.
And my father, except for when Aline came along, she made sure that we spent summers there. And so during the summers, I went to work at the office, at my father's office, and I never saw him, but somebody else would sort of give me projects. Oh, actually, the first year I ran the blueprint department, which meant that I was the only guy there, and I didn't have any instructions. They just sort of said, here. So I didn't know anything about anything.
Were these one of these old ammonia machines?
Yeah, there were lots of chemicals involved, and I know I was sort of dizzy half the time.
Yeah, I did that one summer.
Did you?
Yeah, I sure did.
Well, I forget who it was. IMP or somebody came in, Sir Caesar Pelly, and said, the contrast is terrible here. And I didn't know the word contrast. I mean, I didn't have any instructions. I was just sort of like doing what the first guy said to do.
They just threw you back there with the machine.
Yeah. So, that wasn't that much fun, but that's wetting your feet. Then the next year they gave me little projects like design a house or design whatever you want. Just try stuff. And they gave me that book that has architectural,
templates.
Yeah, it has sort of like how high towel rack should be and
code.
How high, codes for architects. So based on that, I was supposed to design some houses, and that was sort of okay. But for 8 hours, it wasn't that much fun. And then finally, my last triumph there was working on the bathrooms and the elevators in Morrison Stiles College.
Oh, okay. And how'd they turn out?
Well, the towel racks weren't too high, so the water wouldn't run down your arms.
Okay. And that was the height of your architectural career, the towel racks.
Yeah. Although I did take mechanical drawing, so I can write like an architect. And I can draw a little because I took art, later. I studied art and studied painting, and I do paint and I do draw, but, and I enjoy that. But I do it to enjoy it, not for... I haven't been paid for it.
Right, sure. Now, during the summers, when you and your sister Susan were staying with your dad and Aline, she had 2 kids, right? And
she did.
And then your dad and Aline had another child.
Yeah.
Eames?
Eames, right. And Eames, to me, this maybe you're trying to get off the fact that I hated my father, but one of the things that was really awful for me was the fact that I was bunking with Hal, which was the younger brother, who ended up going to Harvard. Don ended up going to Yale. Hal was at Exeter. Don was at Andover.
Okay.
So, and these guys were 2 years and 4 years above me. So I was kind of the runt. But then along came this baby Jesus. Well, I can't say it like that, but this very precious
magic
baby.
child, golden child.
Yeah, well, okay. Along came Eames, who was got the biggest room, took up the smallest space, and made the most noise. And I kind of resented that. I can't, it's like
Well,
I'm
sure.
there as a guest, and I have to cater to everybody's, these guys are dating girls and stuff like that. So they have a little DJ place in the basement that Aline made sure it was rigged up. And I mean, I wasn't into doo-wop or what it was at that point. But anyway, I felt like the fifth wheel, and same with work. But then my father with me, he was always strict. Well, there was one time when he took me to the TWA building. He took me out of prep school, just, like that, and said, we're going to New York, and we went to see TWA building.
Yes.
Which they had just taken the wood off, the wooden
concrete forms.
off. So it was all just the concrete, raw concrete, and wires sticking out, and it was at the point where they were all wondering if the thing would fall down or not. And he just didn't say anything. He just had me look at it. He didn't say anything, and I think he knew that I couldn't figure it out then. I was 14 and didn't really get it. It looked like a mess. It was a big mess, but I did relate with the curves, the beautiful curves, but I couldn't really take all the junk away in my eye.
You couldn't get the big picture entirely.
Right. Well, I never did until after he died, actually. Actually, I never did until a couple years ago. As I said, I hated my father when I was growing up, and I didn't want to have anything to do with him. I wanted to have my own last name. I wanted to, and then he died when I was 19, so that's not really fair because you can't prove anything to anybody, to him.
Yeah.
And I didn't really know that much about his work, which at that point didn't matter because I didn't really care about his work. He had sacrificed his family for his work. So, it didn't sit very well with me growing up.
Did your sister have the same reaction as you did in disliking your father after he changed wives?
Well, it's hard to say. My sister and I were kind of alone together. My mother was kind of distant. She had some psychological problems, and she had a drinking problem, too. So we were kind of like Robin, and she was Batman. I mean, I was Batman, and she was Robin. She was my Robin, and I would give her certain assignments. And if she didn't come through, I'd count to 100. And by the time I got to 100, she came through.
Okay.
Going to get a hammer so I can work on the barn, whatever it was, didn't matter.
She told me when we interviewed her about how your dad would have these very adult conversations at dinner.
Yeah, but it was sort of like, I'm sure Aline and my father sat and had long discussions about how they're going to treat us. So they said, okay, here are the new rules. You have to be semi-formal. You have to show up at a certain time. Then we're going to sit down. Your father's going to make some drinks. Everybody can have a drink if you like, and we're going to talk about world affairs for about half an hour, and then we'll go and eat. And that's pretty much what it was. And it was kind of like, I think it harkened back to Ailill, his father, and they had a very strict routine around, but dinner was at 6, period. And, and that's what they did. So they were trying to set a good example for us. But really they were flirting with each other, and she was the new, his new flame. So it sort of irked me, and she was pretty strong too. I mean, she kind of, if she made up her mind something was going to happen, she would make sure that my dad made it happen.
I read a little bit about her career in broadcasting and in writing.
Yeah.
She was quite established.
Yeah. She was very gifted. She was a good writer, and she was a good influence, and she was a good stepmom. But she wasn't a mother.
Yeah.
And there were certain things that I kind of resented that happened just because I was alone, basically. And then when he died, I got a phone call from her.
This was in 1961.
Yeah. I got a phone call. I was at Cape Cod, So I was 19. My mother and sister were on the trail on a path coming back from the beach, and she told me that he had died, and she told me a little bit about it, about how that it was cancer in the creative center of his brain, and he chose, and there was a 10,000 to 1 chance that he would live, and he chose to have the operation, because if he wasn't creative, then what's the point?
Yeah.
And I noticed that he was carrying a book as we went out for him to explain what was going on, because he never really did explain what was going on, but they tried to. And he was carrying a biography about Leonardo and Michelangelo. And so it was sort of like, what do great men do, or how do they deal with that kind of thing, I think.
The end of life kind of issues?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Then at one point he spoke gibberish, and I said, what was that? And Aline said, oh, never mind.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Things had been developing for a while.
Yeah, yeah.
Aileen died fairly young, too.
Yeah, she's about 10 years after.
Also of cancer?
Yeah. We know that she had, it was brain cancer, but she smoked a lot. She smoked 4 packs a day or so.
Oh, wow.
So that traveled. And my father's could have also traveled, I don't know. It was a big blow to me when I was 19 and just going to college.
Yeah.
I was very internal and introverted. And it took about a year to get out of that. And I couldn't explain why, because we had very little time together. He was very strict and very kind of above it, very aloof. I really wanted to prove something to him, and I never could. But the last thing, getting back to the film, is that here, almost 50 years later, somebody comes to me and says, do I want to make a film about my father? And my first reaction is no. It was no for a year.
Right.
And then I called him up, and I thought, because I started thinking about it, and I had all the books, and I could do all the work, and I had some of his builds.
Aline wrote a book about your dad,
Yeah.
right? That was one of them.
Yeah, that's one of them, but that's not, from my perspective, you can't have the experience of being in the building from a book.
Right, sure.
But you can from a movie, and I thought if somebody else does it, they're going to screw it up, and I wouldn't want that either. And as I started researching, as it came to his final years, or I don't know if he was under the realization or not, but he was working like he was, that he didn't have much time, that he would want to have a piece of history in the architectural future. My father would want to be known in the future of architecture. And it sort of seeped in to me that I could help. It's the first time.
Yeah.
It's the first time I could actually not show him what I did, but show him off. And
by showing what you do as a...
Well, I wasn't thinking about me. I was thinking about him and about the architecture. But what I knew what really turned out was my whole life was practicing for this film. So it became like a huge cathartic change where I did a 180-degree realization about him, about me, about, there's forgiveness. There's a whole Joseph Campbell kind of change in me where I could help show others what he had done and also admire. And really, I did. It was a magical mystery tour for me. It was opening a treasure box, and there's the North Christian Church. And now for people who don't know that much about architecture, I didn't know that much about architecture, so I'm of that ilk, except for I would notice these magic tricks that he had, like the arch looks 3 times higher because it's forced perspective. Mm-hmm. That's a simple thing once you understand it. 17 feet across at the top and 54 feet across at the bottom, the size of each leg. So it just looks like it's 3 times taller. But in terms of the North Christian Church, have you seen it?
Yes.
Okay, good. Did you ever notice that the top was not connected to the bottom?
No.
Did you ever notice there's glass that goes around the inside?
I think I saw that part. from the inside, right?
Yeah. Well, it's like these spines come down from the top, and they go. There's 6 of them.
Eric is drawing now, so you're going to have to imagine this as we go through it.
Well, I'm just saying that this part here, which is kind of the bowl, which is the church, this is all hexagonal.
The floor of the church, yeah.
Yeah, but this I'll have to do this taller and make it like that. You get the idea.
There's lots of drawing taking place here.
Too much. But anyway, so this is glass here. There's 3 feet of glass right here and 3 feet of glass right here. This whole part, this is the, that sort of eye of God at the top. And so what it looks like is that basically this part is all just glass and reflection. So it's this horizon that sort of, it's illuminated from outside, from light outside.
I think one way of saying it might be, particularly in a church setting, it set up this sense of awe for people that was present in a lot of your dad's buildings. I mean, I know certainly the first time that I ever laid eyes on the TWA terminal, and I wasn't actually in it. I actually flew over it.
Yeah.
When I was 10 years old, I just was completely taken with the thing.
Yeah.
That sense of awe was so present with him. And I guess that's one of the reasons why so many people connect him with the future, because he was doing very hopeful buildings.
Yeah, no, all that's true, but that's a way to sum up what he did. But I'm just talking about a technical thing here, which is basically this is like a leg that comes down, but it's not connected to the bottom. So the only connection is glass all the way around, literally. So at number one, it creates a 360-degree soft light. Light's coming in from the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't realize it's not connected. You don't look at this as being not connected to that, but it's not. It's just, I shot there, I went there four different times and shot there twice and didn't realize it until the last time I was walking out and thought, oh my God. And it's kind of like if you go to Dulles Airport and these columns go up and there's a hole in the roof, right where you'd think there would be, the plate would be attached to the roof, it just goes through. And you don't see the connection at all, right?
Right.
So it's a trick. It's a magic trick. It's like, how did he do that? Everything he did that. It's like the Miller House has, the walls are not connected to the ceiling. The ceiling is just supported by those little poles.
Okay.
So you could move the walls anywhere you wanted.
Yeah, that was a pretty cool feature.
Yeah. Oh, do you know the story about TWA? When he first did TWA, in the movie it says Eero decided it wasn't quite right. They had presented the project, the client bought off on the project, and they were all sitting around saying, great, but Eero wasn't quite happy with it. Well, the real story there is that first of all, he would gather the best people around, and he had a great engineer. The engineer said, when they had the first designs, all this cast concrete, he said, well, Eric, you thought of everything, but you didn't think about expansion and contraction. So they took the whole job back, and they designed these windows. That's where the expansion and contraction comes in. Right where all the pressure points would be, there's a window. It's like, that's another magic trick. But in actual fact, those are also have cast great daylight and set up chiaroscuro, dark light depth in the building itself.
And that's going to be opening up as a hotel.
Right, with the new hotel.
Which is amazing, just amazing.
Well, I haven't been there. I have my own issues with that. The idea of if you're going to do something around something else that's iconic, you really don't want to take over. You don't want to look good. You want to fit in and be sort of seamless. And my grandfather did a church in Minneapolis, right around 1947 or 1948. Just he died in 1950. But my father worked on everything. The last 8 things that Eliel worked on too.
Your dad finished up.
My dad, no, he didn't finish the last 8 things, but he had worked on the original church in Minneapolis, and then Eliel passed away, and then maybe 6 years later, they called the office, the Saarinen office, and they were extremely busy at the time, and they said, is there anyone, the church said, is there anyone there who might be interested in doing a school across from the church? Dad got wind of this call, and he picked up the phone and he said, I will, because anybody else will screw it up.
Yeah.
And his solution was to make the school only one level high, and everything else is underground. So he had a whole basketball court, which could be converted into a dining room, converted into a theater, converted into, and they had huge kitchens on the side. And so it became an underground, they kept it below the surface. So basically it didn't interfere with Eliel's form of the spire and the church across the way, which were all much bigger than this low-level, beautiful but modernist school.
So you're thinking that the new hotel is a little out of scale against
I'm thinking that
the
new hotels should be underground.
Okay. Fair enough. I mean, everyone in New York has opinions, so you get to have one too.
Well, I'm not in New York, but I have an opinion anyway.
What happened to Eames? Has he seen the film that you did?
Oh, yeah. I don't know if Don and Hal have. They probably have. The only thing I felt about my father's film is I didn't care if Peter filmed me. Certain things I wouldn't let him do. Like I didn't like this idea of privileged camera where he'd film a shot of me walking into a place and then he'd go back to the door and have me walk by. I wasn't going to do any
Well, it's like reality TV sort of staging,
yeah, except
right?
it's not reality, it's fake reality.
Fake reality, of course, yeah.
It's the privileged camera thing. I don't believe in documentaries with privileged camera where you're in the limo with the stars.
I didn't know the name of this, but now I've learned something.
Yeah.
It's called privileged camera.
Yeah. How does the camera jump out and see the limo arrive and the rock band
Or the camera's already in the house when the guest comes to the door.
Yeah, can't be.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, we learned that a long time ago, but that's part of filmmaking.
Did you tour with the film when it went to a couple of festivals?
Yeah, I had about 40 screenings, and I went everywhere. I did Q&A also, so I learned how to speak to an audience, and that was a very good process for me. The first screening at Cranbrook, I was sweating and had butterflies and, just very self-conscious, and my voice would quiver and I'd run out of words or ideas. And by the time I was through speaking to audiences, I'd be more interested in finding out who they were and trying to entertain them particularly.
Yeah.
And, we had a screening in Estonia, and
Estonia, like as in Europe, Estonia?
As in Europe, yeah.
So in Tallinn?
In Tallinn, yeah,
Okay.
at Kumu. I don't know if you know that museum. It's a beautiful museum. We had a screening there, and the people, they didn't have a lot of questions. They were very nice. Everybody was very nice, and it was lovely and all that. But then we had a screening at the National Museum in Finland. And I said, I just came from Estonia, and the Estonians didn't have a lot of questions. So if you want to prove your medal or your sisu or whatever you want to prove, I'm looking forward to answering a lot of questions. So we had a very long, boisterous Q&A. It was fun.
Now you're working on a project to do a film about your grandfather now. Where is that in development, and can people contribute to this?
Yeah, I don't think we have any rules against contributing.
Okay.
We have a foundation, so it's a tax-free foundation in the United States. It's a 501c3, just like
What's the name of it?
Saarinen Foundation.
Okay.
.org. It's not the Saarinen, it's just SaarinenFoundation.org. And it's the idea of advancing this kind of architecture. Like I would put Gary on a list or on our list, or I would put people who were doing new things and continually shocking people. Not shocking in order to shock, but just being unique themselves. So, when people are doing things that are unexpected, it seems like it's better than expected, but also works of art.
So the foundation is
Expression.
producing the film?
Yeah, right.
And how far along are you? Have you started shooting yet? Are you still raising money?
I was shooting when I was working on my father's film, because
Okay.
I at the bottom of all these books I had was Eliel's book on form. And I don't know if you've read it, but
No.
it's a little gem. It's 1.5 inches thick, and it's just so dense it takes a long time to soak in. But Search for Form is looking for what's your answer to how this works within the environment, within the other competing buildings and things like that. If you look at Cranbrook, he did the boys' school in one era. Then he did the girls' school, which is, the girls' school is kind of forms of fronds, womanly, or plants. It's more like plants growing. The supports are shaped like plants. The boys' school is kind of rectilinear. But it still has lots of, every window pane is different, and every piece of glass is different in the window pane, and they all mean things. They're like gargoyles now. Every gargoyle would be different and have its own expression.
As you look out at the younger architects now, do any of them strike you as being honest architects like your dad and your grandfather?
Well, it's hard to say, because I don't think, like the church I was talking about in Minneapolis, that got a 25-year AIA award, which means that after 25 years they look back at it and see if it's lasting.
If it's held up, yeah.
You don't know if a building is lasting until down the line. So it's really, it's like I can now look at Gary and I can think, okay, yeah. Whereas before I was shocked and I thought he was he was just trying to show off. But now I don't believe that. I believe that he's really digging.
I think he just turned 90.
He turned 90, yeah. Yeah.
Well, this has been really great, Eric. Thank you so much for spending time with me and talking about this, and we look forward to seeing that film about your grandfather.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
In New York, office space for architects is not cheap, and many architecture firms share conference space with lots of other companies in the same building. Some of these conference rooms are quiet, elaborate, glass, soundproof enclosures worthy of coverage in architecture record. And some are just small, echoey gray chambers, which could be a law and order interrogation scene. I talked with the delightful and fun architects Anne-Marie Lebrano and Leah Chavera of Lebrano Chavera, the brains behind the brilliant TWA Hotel and Conference Center, inside such a gray, echoey conference room. On the plus side, the air conditioning could not have worked better, as you'll also hear in the background whoosh.
I have personally experienced the phenomenon that is the rebirth of Eero Saarinen's TWA terminal and the new hotel that is built right next to it. Plus something that is not getting a lot of press that we want to make sure gets more press today. And that's this unbelievable underground conference facility, which is really going to make this place, I think, over the next 30 years. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yes, thanks so much.
So how did the two of you get involved with this project? Was it a competition? Was it a phone call? How did it all start?
Well, it was literally a text from a good friend and colleague, Liz Lieber, who is a partner at Beyer Blinder Bell. And she made the introduction to Tyler Morse, who is the owner-operator of the project. So I think I met Tyler on a random Tuesday afternoon at the Highline Hotel, and he told me 3 things about the project. I had to get 505 keys onto the site, that he wanted 50,000 square feet of event space, and that Saarinen was the celebrity. And that was it. And off I went back to the studio, and we rolled up our sleeves, and...
What, were you dancing at this point? Were you like, I mean, how do you have that conversation?
Totally terrified. I mean, definitely a pinch me moment for us, for sure. At that point, we had been in business about 15 years, and, you know, obviously the commission of a lifetime, so it's really like you don't want to mess this thing up, right? I mean, it is truly one of the sexiest buildings on the planet.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, we both had experience as kids flying out of this space, and I mean, you know, it's sort of how do you even approach the thing? And yet, as architects, you know, having this kind of scale of commission, you sort of always want to throw everything that you could have ever dreamed of in a building onto a project. And I think the real challenge was, and I hope you will agree, victory is sort of checking our ego at the door and saying, okay, what is this building really about, and how can we make this work?
Is there sort of a WWSD, like what would Saarinen do, going on?
Well, yeah, for sure. Yeah. For sure, that's something to consider. You know, you can look back and you probably have good examples in your repertoire of knowledge, but, you know, examples of additions to signature buildings or iconic buildings over time. And it is a challenge. Do you try to do what Saarinen would do and have it be more an extension of the building that was there? Do you try to offset and highlight or contrast, right? There are different approaches to building additions. And so that was one of the first conversations, for sure. You know, what does this need to be? Does it need to complement? Does it need to mimic? No. And so that's one of the first, you know, conversations.
So how does it work technically? Like, is the hotel belong to the development company, Tyler Morris, or is it belong to the Port Authority? Or are they leasing it? I mean, how does that all...
It's actually a very tricky kind of layering. You have the City of New York owns the property, which is leased to the Port Authority, which is JFK Airport.
Yeah.
And then the Port Authority leased to Tyler the use and property line, which we helped kind of move around and negotiate for that ATIL process. So basically we have a lease, Tyler has a lease with the Port Authority, and in addition, he's got a backup lease to the City of New York, because the lease with the Port Authority and New York expires before his lease.
Oh, wow.
So it's very confusing.
I guess you wouldn't want to show up at the hotel one day and go like, you're closed.
Yeah, exactly. Awkward. So, that was definitely part of the layering of the process.
Okay.
And, you know, the Port Authority has its own Department of Buildings, separate from New York City Department of Buildings. So there's a different alteration process, construction approvals process there.
I understand there were dozens or hundreds of agency approvals to get this thing done.
Yeah, I think there's
22 government agencies. Tyler kind of famously quotes there's over 100 consultants on the project in various capacities. from designers to architects to lawyers to engineers to
political advisors.
Right.
Sure. Oh, yeah. You got to have those in the mix, right?
Exactly.
The property was abandoned for how long?
I think it's 15 years, right?
At least.
Yeah, I have to check the dates, right?
Yeah, that's Richard's
territory.
He's really, you know, been involved with the project, with the building itself for over 25 years, and he really should be credited with this kind of saving this building from the wrecking ball when they convinced Port Authority to hang on to it, to preserve it, and to begin the restoration long before we all got involved.
Make it a state historic landmark as well.
Oh, good.
And a federal.
Federal. Now, I remember way back when JetBlue was building the terminal next door,
they had grand plans for this building that seemed to never materialize.
Absolutely. I think that the hope was that it would actually be the entry point through which people would come to the terminal and then filter through. But the fact of the matter is, which I'm sure Richard may have talked to you about, is that when Saarinen designed this building, it was for about 660 people to occupy.
And there are thousands that go through JetBlue.
Yeah.
It just can't handle it.
Can't handle
It
it.
wasn't going to happen.
So the repurposing as a hotel is actually interesting, and in many ways a totally apt program, right? Because that means the space of the Flight Center itself is such a great kind of event space or space to be in, right? To occupy in the way that a hotel lobby can be, right? If done correctly.
Yeah, and certainly the uses that it used to have, which is check-in, lounges, restaurants, retail, all of that is exactly the program of a hotel. So it's sort of a natural progression.
So after you got over the euphoria of getting this project, I mean, what was your first big challenge?
I mean, the biggest challenge is really not just how to fit the scale of the project onto the site, but before we even got to that point, for us, it was really about understanding the building itself. And so what we did was we spent a lot of time looking at historic photographs when the building was in construction and just opened, as well as the drawings. And so what we really came to understand was that this building, that Saarinen kind of conceived of, was a figure in a field. It's this sculptural object, right? You have this endless tarmac and this limitless sky plane against which this could be understood from every angle, from above, from below, from behind, all around. So that was something that we knew we wanted to highlight and preserve. And
yeah, there's no bad angles really on photographs.
Especially when it was built originally.
Yeah.
Right. But when we came in 2014 and you sort of look at the condition of the site, literally it had, there had been additions added that literally touched the edge of the site, and those ring roads that take you in and out of Terminal 5, which is JetBlue, were sort of hemming it in. And so what we decided is there a way that we can bring the building back to its original site? And so what we decided is the role of our new buildings, whatever they looked like, should be a representation of the original sky plane, so that you get to read that figure again, so that when you stand back, you can really understand what Saarinen was trying to achieve.
Because when we found it, like Anne-Marie said, in 2014 airport situation, that figure of Saarinen's building, the sculptural figure, is totally lost. You can't read it. You can't get the viewpoints. And so by creating a kind of neutral backdrop as a building, we can represent that figure, and it becomes legible again, Saarinen's sculptural form.
Now, you know, one of the famous pieces of this site are the travel tubes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And now they connect to the JetBlue building, but they didn't always, right? They were just kind of hanging out there for a long time.
Right. Well, when the building was originally designed, there was at first one, which went out to what they called the trumpets, and that was essentially the lounges for the gates for the
like the Washington Dulles style.
Exactly.
Yes.
Lounges.
And then the second one was built with larger gates, and when T5 was built, those trumpets were removed.
And they were connected to the building, I guess, at that point, but closed off.
But closed off, right. You couldn't get into them, right. And so one of our initial planning ideas, too, to consider, besides the larger site moves that we've been talking about in terms of creating that neutral backdrop, but also was how do you move through this building and these sets of buildings, right? And Saarinen's circulation and sort of planning internally, the flight center was very symmetrical, right? And so there's two flight tubes. You come in up the stairs and you can move out. Our two buildings are, for the most part, symmetrical. And so the circulation routes to your room, as you may have experienced, is also you take either the north or south flight tube, and then we made a new penetration that connects to the elevator lobbies that takes you to your room.
Yeah, penetration is a word for hole. There's a hole in that wall.
That's true.
So when you walk across the tube now, you can exit right into the hotel wing, which is pretty great.
Yeah.
Now, the conference facility, which again is one of my favorite parts, was that originally above ground and you moved it, or how did that come
So
about?
that was a little bit like the elephant in the room. We were like, the thing that was so crazy about this is, let's remember we're at an airport. So we have height limitations both from the FAA, right? Because you've got views for air traffic control to see the planes coming in. And then on top of it, you've got 22 preservationist organizations who don't want these buildings to be taller than the Flight Center because they want it to be the kind of jewel in the crown. And so we had this massive volume
Program.
And in a moment of total frustration, I was like, it's like you just want to shove it underground. And so that's
we
what
did. Also, no small feat because of the water table out of JFK, right on the bay. And so we effectively had to create a bathtub.
Right.
I was wondering that.
Yes.
How do you shore up a bathtub? I mean,
It's not tricky.
I mean, it's not easy. It is
It's
tricky.
not easy. I don't remember the exact number of gallons.
Right, but it's...
But Tyler will tell you.
Yeah,
per
Tyler.
minute.
Yeah, there's like swimming pools worth of water that was being pumped out of the site on a daily basis, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for I forget how many months to make that happen, to get it dry.
I guess it's like building a subway. I mean, you've got that same kind of consideration, right?
They did the same thing at World
Trade Center is a giant bathtub.
Right. But the tricky thing is that the Flight Center is actually kind of grounded because it's built essentially on water with these long wooden piles on angles. So you have essentially, like, if you can imagine a big
tripod.
but I was going to say a marshmallow with toothpicks sticking out of it that you then jam into like kind of a slurry. And then you dig the slurry out underneath it. You know, the big trick is not having the thing tip over into
Right.
this.
I think there should be a kit for this that you guys put out. How to make your own project out of marshmallows.
Legos and marshmallows.
Oh, yeah. Now, the conference facility is how big?
It's 50,000.
50,000.
50,000 square feet. So that's the giant hall where they had the banquet
Exactly.
in June. And then how many meeting rooms approximately in all of that?
I think it's like 30.
30 of different sizes.
Yeah.
Is the food service connected? Is that part of the complex down there too, where they make all the food, or is it brought in through other tunnels to get
There's
to
a full kitchen facility
Okay.
for that kind of. I think they can have like a sit-down dinner for 500 people.
400 at least,
Yeah.
And then all those conference rooms, they can be divided up into 4, 2, or they have larger ones. So depending on, I think the goal has always been, from Tyler's perspective, that a couple people fly in from Frankfurt, a couple people drive in from Midtown, and a couple people come up from Atlanta, and they all meet, and they can rent a conference room, have lunch, and then all leave, and they never have to deal with the traffic.
And there's no place they can do that at JFK besides.
No, this is the only on-airport hotel and conference facility.
Yeah, I mean, how long has that taken?
A long time.
I mean, it's just amazing that it has not existed before
I
now.
know,
Yeah.
I know. In a city like this.
Yeah.
Right, especially where transportation to and from the airports is not easy. There has been a surge of airport conference centers. I think Denver,
Newark does a great wedding
Newark
business.
has apparently.
Really?
Yes,
Yeah.
you'd be
Books every
surprised.
weekend.
Newark, you could get married at Newark Airport?
A huge Marriott conference.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, it's late to New York, but what a fabulous one New York got.
Now, whose idea was the airplane that's parked in back, basically on top of the conference center?
That's all Tyler
Tyler.
fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he found an old plane, right?
Yeah, you gotta get him to have you
Tell the story. Yes.
Okay.
really
Funny.
very funny.
And they brought it in by truck, I guess?
So basically, they cleaned it all up in Maine, where he bought it from Lufthansa, and then basically the body, which was all
Fuselage,
empty, stripped out, was trucked down from Maine And then I guess it made a stint in Times Square for a little while.
It did. They managed to get permissions to have it parked in Times Square and put it on display.
And then they brought it out to the airport and put the wings back on and then craned it into place. But we did have some funny meetings about that. Like, well, can we get 4 helicopters and like fly it and drop it down? Or
That sounds like something out of the Adventures. You know? You can get these giant machines to do that. But I think it's old-fashioned trucks and cranes that how you actually do it. So the project lasted 5 years, 6 years?
Yeah, most of the day, 5 years. Yeah, we were our small firm was the first consultant hired by Tyler, the client, to do initial studies before the public RFP process, which was targeted to developers from the Port Authority. And then we led the team through the RFP process. Tyler won it. And construction was 2.5 years.
Yeah. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, for something of this scale.
Amazing.
and considering how challenging it was from a logistics point of view.
Construction at an very active airport.
Was there anything that you guys had to do, like in the middle of the night, like at 3 a.m.? Were there any special parts of the construction that you could not do during regular hours?
I mean, there was a lot of logistics in the very beginning. This was a crazy thing. When JetBlue terminal was built, for whatever reason, they put all of the site drainage from that building into basically our backyard onto the lot. And so we had to move all of the main drainage pipes from that into the ring road. Is that departure or arrival? I guess that's the arrival road. So they were doing it in chunks in the middle of the night where they would close a single lane and dig some out and put in a piece of the pipe and then,
close it back up, come back the next day.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
It was
not easy.
I mean, my hat's off to Turner for
Construction.
logistics. That was really challenging. And the flight tubes limit the height of anything you can drive along that road.
Right. Imagine sort of doing the scale of construction required of a 7-story building, basically in a china shop, right next to Saarinen's building. Right?
Yeah.
Which is a fragile, historic, 50-odd years, 60-year-old building.
So let's talk about the hotel. I've stayed in the hotel. It's really nice, really, really great. And what's unique about it is that you've achieved some level of time travel. Because you're sending people back to, 62 in terms of the decor? What are some of the things and experiences that people will find inside these rooms?
The room interiors were designed by Stonehill and Taylor, and I think they did an amazing job at capturing some of the spirit of the 60s. I think one of the things that I find most fun is the Martini Bar, which is a custom designed bar in a millwork piece that's right along the entry of the room.
Beautiful walnut and brass detailing.
Right, of the kind of Mad Men era, right? The rooms are filled with Knoll furniture, of course, which Saarinen designed, rotary telephones.
Now, for those of you that don't know what a rotary telephone is, let me briefly describe. Some of you may not know what a telephone is, but let me just describe a rotary telephone. It was a phone that had a rotary dial on it with 10 holes, or penetrations, as we talked about earlier. And you would stick your finger in it, and you would run it around the circle. And the higher the number, the longer you would have to run it around. So 1 was really quick, and a 5 took longer, and a 9 took longer. And it would digitally assemble all these numbers together and send your request to talk to somebody out into the Bell system at the time.
Clicks.
Yes, all the clicks. Right? And I understand that they have these rotary phones, but they're specially modified for today's telecom system, so they emulate a normal phone.
Right.
Are you aware of any movies coming to the building soon? Because I would think that would be an incredible location.
Was it The Fabulous Mrs. Maisel? Is that what it's called? The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel?
Yeah.
I think Annie Leibovitz is the producer, and she was out there last week shooting.
Oh, nice.
So they were in the
Season 3, folks.
They were in the Connie and in the Sunken Lounge, I believe. So that's very exciting.
That's very exciting.
You know, there's something totally kind of Jetsons era, otherworld vibe within the flight center.
It's pretty incredible. But having that as a backdrop is, amazing.
Yeah.
Really amazing.
Yeah.
What do you do now? Do you wait for another text to come in?
Right, that's right.
You just sit by your phone and go, where is it?
I don't know. I think I said to Leah, I can
Or?
retire now.
Yeah.
It's hard to top this.
Well, I'm sure you guys will come up with something great. It's been so fun talking with you. I really appreciate the chance to come and visit here in this little dungeon. And
we appreciate you coming to Brooklyn.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Last but not least, we join George back at the TWA terminal with Richard Southwick, project partner in charge with restoration architects Bayer Blinder Bell. His firm was involved for decades, monitoring the building and at times advocating for its very survival. With the help of the Port Authority, technically just one of the owners, they led it through several emergency restorations until the big news came in about a full-on renovation. The building is not only restored to its original Eero Saarinen grandeur, it's even better.
I came to this terminal in 2008, bringing a group of weary tourists from North Carolina who were on our very first architecture trip. And somehow I'd found the phone number of the Port Authority lady who would give us access to the building grudgingly. But she did. And we came in and found that this building really couldn't be described on videos or photographs. It really had to be experienced. And it was a mess, but it was a sustained mess. The Port Authority was doing a pretty great job in holding it all together so that somebody would come in the future. Now, Richard, when did you first get involved with this building as the architect for its restoration and its ultimate hotel expansion?
Probably about 15 years before you had that very valuable ticket. I was called in by the Port Authority in 1995. As soon as the building was landmarked by the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission on its 30th anniversary. And this is such a valuable development site, they wanted to know what landmarking actually meant. Meaning, does the building have to stay, or do they have other options of demolition and doing a much larger terminal in its space? Right.
And this was before JetBlue had built their terminal, right?
That's correct. The Port Authority had a plan called JFK 2000, which was started to come together in the early 1990s, which first of all anticipated a much larger United Airlines terminal behind us, behind the Saarinen building. And once the Port Authority realized that it was really not in the cards to demolish this building, JetBlue came on the scene and looked at taking the site behind the Saarinen Flight Center and designing and constructing their new terminal in that location.
When did the JetBlue terminal open up about?
JetBlue opened up in 2008.
Okay.
Right, and there are a number of preservation fights to make that work, one of which was to take the flight center and make sure that enough of the flight center was in fact retained to be able to make this viable. And one of those fights was retaining the flight tubes, which used to go to the flight wings to get onto the planes.
Right.
The graft to the JetBlue terminal was very important. JetBlue is the busiest carrier at Kennedy and is really important, regardless what the use of this building would be in the future, to be able to get those passengers into the tubes and populate this to make it viable.
So when did it get decided there was going to be a hotel here?
That was there were 3 series of RFPs. RFP number 2 had identified the use as a new hotel.
Okay.
Because in 2008, which was just prior to that second RFP going out, the One Airport Hotel, the old Ramada, closed their doors.
Really?
Right. So there was, for a number of years, actually from 2008 to 2019, no airport hotel.
Was your experience like renovating a house? Did you find anything surprising when you started digging down into the building?
We found that this is a very unforgiving building. Unlike Dulles Airport, designed at the same time, which was extruded about 15 years ago and could accommodate much larger passenger counts, This building is really kind of set in time in the early 60s. This was designed for passenger loads of planes for about 100 people each. It was designed for the jet age, and the Boeing 707... oh, this is wonderful, huh? You can't see this on the radio, but the host is twirling around. We're all dancing to this wonderful music in the background.
Organ music.
There you go.
That's a Wurlitzer, I think. Some Wurlitzer music.
This is very apropos
very
for
classic.
Your podcast.
Oh, right. I love it. Anyway, the buildings were designed for about an 80-person prop plane, the Lockheed Constellation, which has been, there was an example of which is restored in the tarmac outside the windows, or the Boeing 707, which also housed about 100 passengers or so. The next big thing in the 50s was the supersonic transport, or the Concorde, and everyone thought that would be the next plane to take over beyond the Boeing 707s and 727s. Congress cut out the funding for the Concorde in the mid-1960s at the same point that...
It used to be called the SST, I think.
It is
when
SST,
it was here,
Yeah, it was the supersonic transport. Boeing was actually working on a prototype for Pan Am. Pan Am dropped it because it was too expensive to do the research and development, and it was being subsidized by the U.S. government. The Senate cut off funds, so they dropped it entirely. So Pan Am, more than TWA, actually pushed to get a wide-body plane, the Boeing 747, which went into service in 1968 by Pan Am and then by TWA in 1970. So effectively, as soon as that plane joined the fleet for TWA, this building was obsolete. Every lounge sat about 100 persons. The baggage claim could hold enough bags for a plane of about that size, and it was just inundated by the sheer size and number of passengers.
And there was no security, right? Because this was before all that got put in.
That's correct. The security took place at the door of the airplane. When you walked in, you showed your ticket, and you could run through, think O.J. Simpson and the Hertz commercials.
Well, we think O.J. differently now than he did back then.
Right, with or without a white Explorer, right? Exactly. But after TWA ceased operations and the building was vacated in 2002, the building was used for a number of special events. Open House New York had a big opening to the public once a year. People would line up like Black Friday at the mall waiting to get in. JetBlue would have their annual party here. A number of fashion shows took place.
I'm sure, yeah.
But what was really interesting, Steven Spielberg filmed parts of Catch Me If You Can
in the tubes,
TWA,
right?
Yeah, TWA terminal and the tubes. And they did a great service to the restoration of the project.
How was that?
They wanted to bring the building back to the early 1960s. So they removed all the x-ray machines and the change booths and the security devices, and they made it look like it originally looked about 35 years earlier. When we came in and started doing the restoration, a lot of the tile work and a lot of the finishes were in pretty poor shape, but these set designers wanted to make it look good enough for a lens of a camera, which is not too close, but certainly
close enough.
They took care of a lot of the really bad scar tissue. So we started doing surveys on the tile work, and we saw that there were a lot of little rubber erasers that were the color of the tile, and some set designer ended up taking a pen and stippled on all the aggregate that you see in these little ceramic tiles. We still see either paper discs or rubber erasers that were substituting for the actual tile that they did to clean up the set for the filming.
How many hundreds or thousands of those erasers did they put in?
We've probably found a couple hundred, and who knows how many more are still there.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Now, he died in 1961.
He died about a year before this building opened, at a very early age of 51.
51?
He had a brain tumor and died within 30 days. There's a plaque in the sunken seating area that's commemorated to him about his wife, Aline, was there at the opening of the building. And this building had a huge amount of positive publicity. People were following this all the way through construction, and it ended up taking 4 years. It was a very long construction period. I often think that this is the perfect Saarinen building as well. Saarinen was unfairly judged at the time as being a corporate architect And the more progressive architects in the 50s really thought that he had sold out. And he did work for IBM and John Deere and General Motors and CBS. At the same time, he really made his reputation with the St. Louis Arch, which is very expressive, very sculptural. This building was really interesting because it's a combination of the two. He was able to come up with this really strong corporate identity for TWA, do a very expressive building, so it's really very sculptural, and it's also very symbolic of flight. The original shell designs, you see this in a lot of photographs, were really a turtle shell, no slots. And there's a long-standing argument between the structural engineer and Eero Saarinen about whether they needed to add expansion joints to the building so large and whether the concrete would crack and fail because there was no way to relieve the coefficient of expansion. So the engineer prevailed at the end. They put 4 slots into the 4 lobes rather than one large shell. And in a way, architecturally, that was brilliant because they're now 2.5-foot wide skylights, which then provide a limited amount of light into the interior, so it starts to mitigate the contrast between the large curtain wall on the outside and a very dark center of the building. I mean, the whole structure of this building is phenomenal. Architects were playing with thin shell construction at the time. Saarinen, for example, the Ingalls hockey rink up at Yale, and Pierre Luigi Nerve up at the George Washington Bridge bus terminal. And they're all pushing the envelope to see how thin and how long and how expressive these architectural forms could be. The shell for this is as thin as 8 inches in a lot of places, and it supported 65,000 square feet in these 4 segments or lobes, or grapefruit sections, if you believe the myth of Aline cutting the grapefruit, on 4 columns. So it's in perfect balance. Half the weight's aft and half of it's fore. Almost like a bird standing on 2 very spindly legs. You have half of the bird's weight being in front of the legs, half behind it. They all come together in the very center of the building. They kind of kiss, slightly in tension for 2 lobes, slightly in compression, but it's all in perfect balance.
When the building opened, it was just heralded. I mean, everybody loved it generally. There were some architects that didn't like it, but there were a number of the public really wanted to come. They wanted to see it. They wanted to fly through it.
Well, I think the building got a tremendously positive reaction. Ada Louise Huxtable, the architectural critic for the New York Times, when it first opened, wrote in her review that the TWA terminal was the most dubious idea at first, and paradoxically turned out to be the best piece of architecture at the new Idlewild Airport. Interestingly, the Pan Am building, which she thought would be an incredible piece of architecture, disappointed.
Yeah.
I think the building's really symbolic of that post-war optimism. It's really symbolic of the coming jet age. And it's also a symbol of modernism, which also was the fundamental roots of modernism were based on improvement of one's life and being able to, through architecture, improve society. I wouldn't say this is particularly 62 other than the restoration of the flight center. It's really seeped in modernist sensibilities, but not particularly replicative of what would have been done 50 years ago. But the use of natural materials and a limited palette and large expanses of natural woods. The hotel rooms have lots of walnut and new curtain walls that were just coming of age at that time.
And you have this special glass in the hotel rooms, right?
Yeah, the hotel bedrooms are situated very close to active taxiways. And one of the mandates early
Taxi like in planes, not cars. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
As in planes. As in not only planes, but as in Boeing 747s and Airbus 380s, which are the big
enormous
boys,
ones, yeah.
the big boys. In fact, the rooms in the South Hotel are very close to an alley where all the A380s come into the international terminal. So I stayed here opening night.
Nice.
And I was able to get a room that looked straight out to that alleyway to see the wide bodies come in. And did not hear a peep. It was the quietest room I've ever stayed in. The glass curtain wall is 4.5 inches thick. It is comprised of 7 layers of glass. a triple laminate and 2 double laminates. Each piece of glass is sized differently to react to different frequencies. Then there are 2 air spaces, and those are also different dimensions. And the large air spaces work really well on very low frequencies, i.e. a A380 revving up its engines to get out to the runways. And the squeaking truck noises and cars and taxis and all that have a much higher frequency, and the glass works very well to mitigate those sounds.
That's a very thick piece of glass.
That's a very thick and very heavy piece of glass. Each piece weighs almost a ton. Each room has 3 4-foot by 10-foot lights or pieces of window. And you stand next to it, you can see what should be an incredibly noisy type of activity right outside the window, and you don't hear a beep.
Well, Richard, I know you've got a lot to do tonight. Thank you so much for spending time telling us about this great project.
It was my pleasure, and I can't wait to hear this.
Thanks for listening. You can learn more about Eero Saarinen at usmodernist.org/saarinen.htm. That's SAARINEN. And you can book a stay or dinner at the TWA Hotel at www.twahotel.com. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Nichiha.com/US Modernist and Modernist Realtor Angela Roll.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive Modernist archives to hear past shows, discover 7,000 mid-century houses, and access 2.6 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. Contact George at george@usmodernist.org or on Instagram at mr.modernism. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song is performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Our esteemed guests get thoroughly Googled by Chief Researcher Cindy Stratton, not her real name, from her own secret massive underground conference center, unfortunately not designed by Lubrano Chavara. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I will be back soon with another restorative, timeless, visionary edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.